Welcome to There is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs, and I've been in business since 1994. The purpose of this podcast is to get to the real deal of what really works, and most importantly, why it works. Because you know what? There is a method to the madness. Today, I'm going to start talking about the 7 principles of physical training, and I'm going to start with just one of them today, which is the principle of individuality. But before I get to that, let me thank our very first sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They are committed to providing the highest level of customer service in home selling. If you are interested in knowing what your home can sell for, please give them a call, 386-451-2412. So I want everybody to understand that there are 7 principles that are pretty tried and true throughout the decades. And these are the 7 principles of physical fitness. When I was teaching sports medicine, I used to always really push on my students that principles are important to understand because trends are going to come and go. Fads are even worse than trends, but there are principles that always work. The problem with principles is they require people to put in a lot of thought. Like, principles aren't cookie cutter way of doing things. There's principles. And what you have to figure out is how do you do things and work within the principles, which I think are really important. The other thing I think that's very important is that's where coaching comes in as well. Like, I always like the term coaching versus training when it comes to working with people. Training, it more implies like you're trying to come up with a stimulus and a response. Like, you do this, I do that. Well, that's good. But coaching is more about teaching, and I prefer to teach. I prefer to coach. And when we are focused on the principles, we're coaching people about what's most important. Today, I'm going to focus on the principle of individuality. Now, as I said, there are 7. There's specificity, there's the principle of overload, the principle of progression, the principle of recuperation, individuality, as I already said, the principle of reversibility, it's reversibility. I was going to give it a fancier term, but we'll stick with reversibility. And then adaptation / using different forms of periodization. So changes to bring about adaptations. All right. So I'm going to cover all of them. I know I've done it before, but you know what? I'm going to do them again. Individuality. We are all different. We are not all just supposed to pull up workout routines that are cookie cutter programs for everybody. It just doesn't work that way. Now, we all respond to exercise. Like, we all have responses and we all have adaptations. Responses are what happen immediately, like you start running and your heart rate goes up. That's a response. You run for 6 months and your VO2 max is improved. That's an adaptation. When we strength train, we might be around rep 14 or 15 and we feel burning in our muscles. That's lactic acid. That is a response. 6 months down the road, we have put an inch on our biceps and we can curl 25 more pounds. That is an adaptation. Both happen in everybody, but they don't all happen at the same time in the same way from the same stimulus. That's where we are all very different. Now, we all respond the same way as far as what happens. In other words, that in order to improve our VO2 max, we are going to have to stimulate that system further, farther, harder than we have before. Early on, it doesn't take very much. Down the road, it's near impossible just to get an inch a little bit better. So we all need training. We all need a frequency, intensity, and a time. There's no magic ways to get more fit without doing that kind of work. In the gym with strength training, it's the same way. We all respond from doing more repetitions or more load, sometimes more volume, sometimes more frequency. In other words, we're all going to get better from the principle of overload, which I am, of course, going to cover and probably have covered more than any other principle. Maybe it's the most important one, although I would say that they're all important. So we all are going to need overload to get better. But what we overload is going to be different for each individual, and how much we overload is going to be based on a lot of different variables. Let me give you a few. Let's take age. Now, I'm a big believer in you can continue to stay super fit and improve your fitness as you age. No question about it. I mean, there have been studies that have shown that people go through hypertrophy even in their 90s. So they increase their muscle mass even in their 90s. There have been many cases where people have done their first marathon after the age of 60. In college, in my graduate school program, Dr. Roeder did his first Ironman after the age of 50. Prior to that, he really didn't even do any endurance sports at all. Whole long story as to why he got into it. But basically, as a PhD in physical education, he let himself get out of shape. One day he noticed himself huffing and puffing, climbing the stairs, and that was just not good enough for him. So he started training, and then he first did a 5K, then he did a marathon, and then he eventually did the Hawaiian Ironman. He actually did it twice. This all occurred after the age of 50. He literally started training for all this after the age, and he went to such a high level. So yes, we can absolutely all improve. But what we have to understand is with age, we don't recover as well. So we have to understand that with the principle of individuality. So if we see some kid on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and they're talking about like how hard they're training, they're running 4 miles every day and they're doing it hard, and you're noticing their 5K times dropping or whatever, or you're noticing a person that is doing a split routine and they work out every day during different muscle groups, and you're noticing that their muscles are getting bigger because, they're doing what we Americans do. They're posting these pictures of themselves so we can all give them 1 million likes. So we absolutely know what they're doing, and we're seeing the adaptations. We're seeing them grow before our eyes, and we think, oh, wow, I'm going to have to do what Jimmy does. That's how he gets big. And Jimmy's 23 years old, so he's going to have the recovery of a 23-year-old. We're not the same. So if you're in your 50s, you're going to need more recovery. That's the individuality. And that's just with age. And within each 50-year-old, there are different things too. Everybody responds and adapts to different or higher and lower levels of stimulus. Like, we are still stimulus and response. Absolutely. If we train, things are going to happen. But how much stimulus and then how much response is going to come out of that is highly, highly individual. So age is just one. Then you're going to have body types. And that's a biggie when we're talking both strength and cardio, as I like to call a hybrid athlete, which I think is the most important thing to do. I think we should all be focusing on trying to have as much endurance as we can have and as much strength as we can have. So they both really, really matter. Body types matter, and body types are a thing. There are endomorphs, there are ectomorphs, and there are mesomorphs. Mesomorphs are your muscular body type. They put on muscle easier than the other groups. Endomorphs tend to be more overweight. They have thicker bones, and they've always battled keeping weight off their body. They always battle being overweight. They just battle it. It's harder. Then there's ectomorphs who always battle putting weight on. They always tend to be a little more thin. You might say, oh, well, one's better than the other. That's just not true. They're just different. Like if you want to be a great marathon runner, you better hope you're an ectomorph. And if you're not going to be a great marathon runner. You probably can be good. Anybody can be good. I mean, shoot, I've done a lot of different events and I've had my butt smoked by endomorphs before flying by me and thinking, my God, they shouldn't be that fast. So anybody can get better and get good. But to be elite, you've got to be the right body type for what you're trying to do. If you want to have a lot of big muscles, you better hope that you're a mesomorph because that's the body type that can put on more muscles. So you can see little Jimmy on your Instagram doing all these weights and getting bigger, and then you notice he's got big shoulders, you notice he's got big pecs, you notice he has peaks in his bicep. Okay, all that just doesn't happen from the gym. That's very genetic, so he's got the right body type for that. And you might follow that plan and think, why on earth am I not getting bigger? Well, you might be an ectomorph, or you might be an endomorph. And endomorphs, as I said, tend to carry more body fat. But does that mean the mesomorph's the best? Well, if you want to be a bodybuilder, yeah. If you want to be a linebacker, yeah. If you want to be a marathon runner, no. Be better to be an ectomorph. If you want to be an offensive lineman and get paid $7 million a year to play in the NFL, no. You better be an endomorph. So every body type has what they're best at, but we all respond differently to training. There was this guy when I was in college, and his name was Kenny. And I like to tell the Kenny story because it's important. I didn't know better. Like I was working on my psychology degree. I had worked out for many, many years. It was just my thing. I was into it. Now I happen to be more of a mesomorph. So I was able to put on muscle fairly easy. I was able to get stronger fairly easy. So I was considered like one of the bigger, stronger guys in the gym. And for some reason, that was very important to Kenny, who was a few years younger than me. And we worked out together because we were buddies. We played basketball together. We hung out together. He's a good guy. And, he sort of looked up to me because I was one of the bigger guys. So he wanted to work out with me. I said, sure. I always liked having workout partners back then. Now I don't. It's funny. I like to work out alone. But anyway, total side note that is totally has nothing to do with the story. But I didn't know, as I said, so I dragged Kenny in the gym with me every day, and this guy was tough. Like he could take a licking and keep on ticking. He would make a Timex look bad in comparison. I mean, this kid was tough. He was tall. He was 6'2", maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, and he was a pure ectomorph. But I didn't know about body types. I didn't know about physiology yet. I was still this young college kid who hadn't even started my master's in ex-phys yet. I just worked out. And the only knowledge I got was from what was passed down to me from the bigger guys and reading magazines, which, by the way, is not enough and it's not good enough. So I would smoke this kid. I mean, I would have him try to do what I would do. Like literally, if I was trying to squat 315 pounds, and I shouldn't say try. I mean, if I was squatting 315 pounds and doing, 10 reps or so, whatever I used to do with that, me and my other workout buddies, we would put Kenny under the bar of that. Literally, he'd have his knees wrapped, he'd have his weight belt on, and we'd spot him. We're like, the only way you're going to get this is forced reps. And we'd be doing most of the weight, spotting him, or I would be, and the poor guy could barely move the thing. Or if we're bench pressing, it would be like way heavier than he could go, and he'd be doing these forced reps. I mean, and I would train every day, and I could get away with it because I was in my early 20s, very early 20s. And, so I had youth on my side, I had mesomorph on my side, and I could do all this. Well, months go down the line, months pass, and what happens with Kenny? I mean, he looked identical. He might have gotten a little stronger. I don't know. Maybe we started to see a vein in his bicep. I don't know. I just remember going, well, I don't know, man. Maybe you got to train harder, I mean, we had no idea. Well, the truth of the matter is, sure, he had youth on his side, but he was an ectomorph. He's not going to grow. He's not going to get bigger. So, we have to take these into consideration. We have to take all these principles into consideration. And the principle of individuality is so important. You have to know, what you are, what you're capable of. And don't get me wrong, this isn't negative. We can all get better, but to what extent and how much training do we need? Oftentimes when people aren't getting what they want, they go to the default mode of trying harder. So like if you're an ectomorph, you're going to go, oh man, I'm not getting bigger. I'm not getting stronger. And so what do? They try harder. They push themselves harder at the gym. They go more frequently. What happens? The opposite. They end up actually getting smaller because ectomorphs need more recovery. And if you're an older ectomorph, you need even more recovery. So you have to be counterintuitive and you have to go, oh shoot, so I don't need more, I need less. Yes. Why? Because that's how your body's going to grow and recover. And we could take this analogy now to endurance sports. Let's say you're an injury-prone athlete, and a lot of them are just because they overtrain. It's not like you're born injury-prone or not injury-prone. I mean, there are some considerations you have, maybe some genetic liability with, like you're just prone to certain muscle imbalances. Maybe you're prone to certain flexibility issues, things of that nature. But injuries are really in your control, but some just really, really overtrain. And once you've gotten some chronic injuries, it's kind of like, well, you're now vulnerable, right? So to tell that vulnerable athlete, or if they think for themselves and go online and go, oh, so-and-so is running 5 days a week and they're putting in 50 miles a week, I need to do that. Well, that's the last thing they need, because you're not going to get any faster when you're hurt, right? If your knee's in a demobilizer because you basically tore your meniscus, you're not going to get faster. Matter of fact, every time you do that, you really are getting slower. And every time you hurt yourself, you're really hurting your chances of reaching your goals. So that's not the way. They might be better off on 1 or 2 days per week. Years ago, when I was in one of my first locations, it was probably location number 2. I had a girl work for me, and she was an elite. She was an elite athlete, and I don't use that word lightly. A lot of people use elite around here too commonly, and it's like, no, she was elite. Like she went to Olympic trials for swimming. She was elite, and in college she was running very, very low 17, 18 minute 5Ks. So she was an elite athlete, but she got hurt all the time. When she lived in Miami, she got hurt all the time. And so when she started working for me, she started picking my brain, knowing I was an exercise physiologist. And I'd say, look, you need to run less. Why don't you run twice per week? She's like, twice? My old coach said I should run 5 or 6. And I'm like, yeah, and you got hurt. So that's great if you can do it. And I talked about that the other day. It's great if you can do it. But if you can't, because you, the individual, get hurt when you do that, then you're silly to try to do it. So I said, just as an experiment, just for a few months. So she did one longer day on the weekend. She did one speed day during the week. So she ran twice per week. She ended up running a PR in her 5K in that time frame. She ended up running 17:24, which was a course record here locally for a long time. And she was a young female. So she was turned on to that. All of a sudden, I didn't have to preach anymore. She became what we call a minimalist in training. And she went on to do Ironman and things like that. And she never overtrained, at least on a run, because she knew she couldn't. So she got it. So we are all different. You really need to quit looking at what other people are doing, right? Not to definitely go off on this tangent, but we tend to, as a society, have the inability to mind our own business anymore. Like we're always worried about what other people are doing on social media or whatever. When it comes to training, when it comes to life in general, I'd say stop it, but that's not my job. So I'm just going to say when it comes to training and anything physical, stop it. You don't know that individual. You need to figure out what is your best level of stimulus and response. What stimulus do you need as an individual at your age, at your gender, at your goal, at your injury risk? What is the stimulus that is going to bring out the best response and then the best adaptation. That is your mission to figure it out. As I said the other day, one tool that helps us do that is a good training diary. It will really help us to figure this out. But we have to do it. And that's why cookie cutter programs don't work. We have principles we try to follow, we listen to and go, okay, wait a minute. I'm not responding like this person. That must be because of the principle of individuality. Right. So we can bring it back to a principle. All right. Now let me thank Overhead Door of Daytona Beach. They are the premier garage door company in the state of Florida, and we are lucky enough to have one here in Daytona Beach. They're owned by Jeff and Zach Hawk, and they are total professionals. Please check them out at overheaddordaytona.com.